This week, we have two interviews. First, we welcome David Martin, CEO of DavidXMartin, LLC, to discuss critical business decision-making. Then we welcome Brian Reed, Chief Mobility Officer at NowSecure, to discuss mobile app testing at scale. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Security can't solve crucial problems when they have to wade through thousands of alerts a day. With ServiceNow, you can easily prioritize and respond to your most crucial business threats. That way you can go from overwhelmed to under control. ServiceNow brings security, risk, and IT together on one platform. Learn more at securityweekly.com/ServiceNow. These days, it's rarely a case of if you'll be hacked and more of a question of when. Once the attacker has passed your defenses, they cover their tracks and systematically infiltrate your network to steal information or shut your business down. You need to rethink the way security is delivered for your digitally transformed business, and there's one security solution that delivers it all: NetScout. Get visibility without borders for consistent detection, mitigation, and prevention across any network, data center, cloud, 5G, and more. Learn more at securityweekly.com/NetScout. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 142, recorded September 9th, 2019. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado, waiting for the Broncos to get stomped on this evening. Joining me from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, celebrating a wonderful Patriots win last night, are my co-hosts, Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque.
What a game last night, buddy.
We're smiling. We're smiling because next week we have Antonio Brown, and I can't wait to see Brady. It's just going to be, it's kind of going to be like when we had Randy Moss.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm predicting.
100%.
I think we were undefeated that season.
I think we were.
I think we pissed off enough people, so we'll turn it back over to Matt.
The only saving grace for the Broncos tonight is that AB is not with the Raiders tonight. That might give them a shot. That's all I'm saying. Notice I'm in my silver and black because I figured if I root for the Raiders, then the Broncos might actually win.
Oh, boy.
We'll see. All right, we have exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We are now partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you'll be receiving 1 CPE credit per webcast. Register for one of our upcoming webcasts with Logarithm, which is this week, or Extra Hop, or both, by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find them in our on-demand library at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia this October 10th and 11th. If you are attending and would like to sponsor an interview, please submit your interest at our conference request form at securityweekly.com/booking. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 discount to attend the 2-day conference, which also includes the CISO Forum. Use discount code HH19SW when you register, or go to securityweekly.com/hackerhalted and register there. All right, let's get ready for our first guest interview. After 4 decades of experience as a financial leader for PwC, AllianceBernstein, Citibank, and others, David Martin leads a strategic risk management consulting firm that provides advisory services on complex risk and fiduciary issues to senior management of financial services and central banks. David also serves as special counsel to the Center for Financial Stability on Cybersecurity and Emerging Risks, and on the Sanctions Committee of the U.S. Department of State's Advisory Committee on International Economy Policy. David has authored dozens of articles and 2 books, Risk and the Smart Investor and The Nature of Risk. David, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Glad to be here.
Now, before we get into decision making, right? When you and I were preparing for this segment, we said, what topic could we talk about? Because I think you could go in a couple different directions. We decided let's focus on some of the challenges around IT decision making and business decision making. But before we go there, give us a little background. How did you end up where you are today? I mean, your background, I read a little bit of it, but give us a little more of that story.
Well, the long and short of it is I got an MBA in corporate finance, started working for PwC, started on the audit side, got really bored with it, and then started on the consulting side, reviewing large data centers. And from there, I was more out of town than I was in town. Decided that I needed a change of venue, and I went to Citicorp as the CFO of a major group that handled the 450 largest multinationals. I went from there to put a system around the world. I did a lot of overseas travel, and then I just started running businesses around the custody. I went on to be Citicorp Industrial Credit, and then finally I started getting these staff jobs. I was really getting annoyed, and then finally one day I was working for the CEO of Citicorp, and he used to say to me, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Whatever the man wants." And eventually, company got in trouble, and he made me in charge of risk. And so I became the enterprise risk manager for Citicorp. I did that for many, many years, and then from there, left, started my own hedge fund, and from there went to work at AllianceBernstein, where I was responsible for risk and did a lot of work on the technology side. And from there, I left there and then started teaching at NYU Graduate School of Business, wrote a couple of books.
So when you write one book, right, you have to write 2 books, don't you, David?
You actually have to write 3.
3 books?
It's true,
so are you working on a 3rd one? I only saw 2 in the bio.
I'm actually working on a 3rd one about cyber risk management, but the future of cyber risk management being cyber wellness, which is a more proactive approach than what people do today.
Got it. I think what's interesting about your background is that you came to risk from the financial side. Some people, I did risk, but I came from the security side, but I didn't have near the financial background that you had. And so I've seen risk groups fall under different parts of the organization. I think finance and people who understand financial risk are in great positions, but I've also seen some folks come from the security side, which is an interesting background with you.
Yeah, I did both, actually. In fact, believe it or not, when I 20 years ago, I actually hired a world-class hacker to come in at Citibank and see if he could hack the company. I mean, and people weren't even thinking about cybersecurity in those days.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about critical business decision making, because I think as a leader, we have to make critical decisions all the time about the business. And your article that you provided beforehand provides kind of a 4-step kind of thought process on what that looks like. Let's start to walk through that a little bit.
Well, I mean, let's take a step back first, if we may. I think there's a huge disconnect between IT decision making and business decision making, and over time, it's going to become more critical that it gets in sync, because IT is really going to be part of the vanguard in the sense of new products, new markets, issues with privacy, issues with security, and the way IT people have grown up to think about security is a lot different, and decision making is a lot different than the way business people think about security and the way business people think about making business decisions. And there's this disconnect there that sort of needs to get tied together.
Yeah, and we've seen this disconnect kind of really get exacerbated around this concept of digital transformation. As the business has been engaging in building new capabilities, IT then kind of sometimes falls a little behind. The business wants to move faster than IT will allow them. So we've seen businesses make decisions around IT, which also sometimes around security at the same time. And so as the business is trying to be nimble and make decisions to grow revenue, engage with customers, IT and security folks are sometimes way behind.
Well, it's not only way behind, it's multifactorial in the following sense. One, it's hard for IT people to be in sync with the business people if they're not informed of what the business people are thinking, right? That's one. Two, IT people approach decision making a lot different than business people. For example, most IT people, if you say to them, what kind of reliability do you want? They'll say 90 to 100%. Why? Because if anything goes wrong, they're going to be blamed. So they'll say, okay, let's go for the highest reliability so we don't have, so we invest the money and don't have those kinds of issues. So, there's this issue about, not being informed. There's this issue about where you're coming from in terms of decision making. And then there's this other issue in terms of how does an IT person allocate resources and how does he know where the right allocation is relative to the business? Okay, so that's a whole nother disconnect. And I think the last thing is that over time, the way I think about it, basically, most things will be disintermediated out. So, for example, price. You will know what price. Price will not be a differentiating factor. Quality. You will know what quality. One of the few differentiating factors that will be trust. Okay, which will become a more and more important item to the consumer. So that he could buy this item and he can trust that it will be given the trust that it is. So that, folding into the security aspect of it will become more important and make the IT people think about it much more. And also in a way that's congruent with the business people, how they think about it. So I think with those factors, I think this is a big gap, and I think it needs to be closed.
So as we think about the decision-making process for IT, what do they need to account for? Because you said they make those decisions differently. They don't necessarily understand where the business is going. So how do they get informed to start to make some of these better decisions for the business moving forward in alignment, I would assume, with the business?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the first step is having a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. How many times have I been in meetings on critical business decisions with folks from IT are not represented? So if they're not represented at the meeting, with a seat at the table, how could they possibly know what the forward thinking is, how we're going to move this, what the problems are, how we're reacting to them and moving forward? So I think that's an issue.
Yeah, I feel like in my career I've been in IT and you hear about changes in the business. You're hearing about it secondhand oftentimes. So you know the business is changing, but the piece that's missing is you don't understand why and the importance of it, right? I think that's the test of a true leadership team, that even if people don't have a seat at the table, you get that leadership message of this is why we're going in, this is the direction we're going, and this is why, so that everyone rallies behind where the business is going. And that, as your business gets larger, that gets harder and harder, right?
Oh, of course. And I mean, if you don't, the risk there is if you don't have a seat at the table, you're not influencing the decisions that are being made.
So you don't feel part of it.
You don't feel part of the actual decision that's being made. You're actually getting the decision dictated down to you, right? So for me, I think it's important that the business starts seeing IT and security as a piece of the strategic arm of the business, and to be honest with you, a part of that enterprise risk management as well, right? Because right now I feel like we're seen as a little bit different and outside of enterprise risk.
Here's a great example of that, Jason, too, is that even when IT does have a seat at the table, right, it's typically like your manager. Like in my career, right, my manager gets a seat at the table, they report back. oftentimes like they're not excited or don't agree, even though they had a seat at the table. They don't agree in the direction that it's going, and that disseminates down from the team. If you have great leaders at the top, your IT manager comes back and tells the security team, look, I know it's going to be a lot of work, but this is an awesome direction we're going in.
But it's connecting IT too, right? So one of the biggest struggles throughout my career growing up and trying to make that connection was being an IT professional who grew up in the engineering space.
Now, you're making the assumption that you're grown up, first of all.
As much as I possibly could ever grow up, correct? I
right?
mean, but then I made a conscious decision to say, I'm going to learn the business.
Yeah.
Right? And flip out of the engineering mindset, flip out of the traditional IT mindset and say, I'm going to start learning the business. Because here's the deal. If I'm going to influence and I'm going to create trust within my organization to my CEO and my peers, I need to be able to speak their language and translate that back to technology, to innovation, and to risk. Right?
Sorry, Dave, we've been talking. Is that your experience as well in terms of communication?
No, absolutely, but even more so in the sense that if you're moving forward, IT is a critical component of that move forward, and you don't inform them, how could they react?
Right.
How could they put resources there? So I think it's much more than just being informed. It's more about being part of the process and being at the front of the process.
Exactly.
Because IT becomes more critical in terms of it being integrated into the product and the product delivery. Okay, if they're not at the forefront, you can't move quickly and you can't do it the right way.
Sure. So, David, what do you have for recommendations for leaders within an organization who may have a buffer between them and the board of directors or the CEO, for them to kind of get that seat at the table so they can start influencing the organization?
Well, first off, it's part of management to recognize that they need IT to have a seat at the table, right? Mm-hmm. So that's step one. And two, to recognize when critical decisions are being made, that somebody from IT is representative. So the first part is really recognizing critical decision making. Two, understanding that IT has to be present. Three, ensuring that that there's follow up. That that given a situation that the conclusions are worked out, and the way forward is worked together out with the IT folks in a way that makes it a team within the organization, and everybody's working on the same page and together moving forward.
Yeah. Now, let's assume IT has a seat at the table. We've gotten them a seat at the table, either management or whatever, realize IT needs to be there. What does IT need in the security decision makers? What do they really need to be able to do to help make right decisions for the business? I think this is where your kind of 4 steps of decision making come in.
Right. So let's talk about each step, right? And I don't remember them by heart. So if you could help me, I would appreciate it. I think the first one is recognizing that you have to make a critical decision.
Yeah, it's recognizing the problem, right? I think all of us have to realize that we have to, identify that there's a problem and we'll have to find a solution for it, right?
Right. People talk about risk and they say, what is risk? And I always say risk is the absence of information. If you don't have information, you don't understand the consequences, and that creates risks. What does that do? Those risks, if they're not managed, what they do is they inhibit your progress because, with making your goals and objectives. So once you understand that there's risk there, then the question is that how do you manage it, right? So you really have to think about identification. How do you identify it? How do you prioritize it? Okay. And then, what resources you put against it so that the outcome, there's a risk we can't trade up, but the outcome, is the best outcome that you could provide. You have to think about it from that kind of perspective. But the first step in the process is understanding, what are we going? Where is the critical decision making? What's the issue here? That's the first step.
Right. And obviously, lack of information, which is what creates the potential risk. There's some information you could gather up front that maybe informs you a little better about the risk kind of balance, but there's some information you may never know. So when it comes to gathering that information, how long should an organization or a decision maker take? You can't wait forever to try to get all the information. Where's that balance to really understand, I have enough information, I understand the risk, now I'm ready to think about how to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of things here in the answer. One, people think about information in a reactive. If you look at cybersecurity, for example, what people do is they react, okay? And if you look at the intelligence agencies over the past 10 years, they've changed a lot. They've become intelligence-driven. What does that mean? It means that rather than waiting for information to come to you, you go out and you seek the information. You try to get information that's out there and bring it back into your organization. So instead of reacting to it, you prepare for it. Okay? So part of the information, part of the idea is not to just react, but to be proactive in terms of speaking the information. That's one side of it. The second side of it is that, you can't, there's no such thing as you don't have information. There's always risk. Okay? But what I like to think about it is I like to box it. What's the risk I can take, relative to the return that I'm trying to make? So I think about risk as a trade-off, okay? And the third, and you have to make the right kind of trade-offs. The third thing is that, like when I was thinking about risk for a bank, I always thought, banks are mirrors of the environment. If the environment does well, the bank's customers do well, they will do well. If the environment is terrible, their customers do well. They could be the best risk guys in the world, but it's just not going to do anything because the environment's bad. So what you really want to do is understand the environment that you're in and understand how it's moving forward, okay, so that you can position yourself to take advantage of that or protect yourself if it's going to be bad. So it's sort of knowing where you are and where you're going and what you're going to, what the road looks like down the road.
Right. And then when it comes to coming up with solutions, I mean, you recommend come up with alternatives, look at potential alternatives to making that decision. But then how do you kind of, I've come up with multiple approaches. How then do you decide which one to take? Is that a collaboration with the other leaders? How do you think about, okay, I've got potentially 3 paths forward. Which way do I go?
Okay, so first point, best decisions in life are made when you have alternatives. I totally agree with you. You need to really develop the alternatives. People try to make decisions either by not developing alternatives or they don't develop the alternatives well. So you really have to, once you think about the alternatives, okay, then you can sort of like if you're forward thinking, okay, and trying to understand the world, people use scenarios, for example. What they do is they do various alternate scenarios, various alternate stories, if you will, of what the world's going to look like. And the reason why they do it is they bound the realm of possibility. Given different scenarios, you get a sense of what the future is going to look like. Well, if you think about decision making, it's the same kind of thinking, where if you have very good alternatives, you can get a sense of where are my risks here? Which decision covers them better? Which decision had, you want to make asymmetric bets, higher return, lower risk. So you can take a look at your alternatives and really start to get a sense of what the best alternative is, because you're comparing things and you're trying to get a sense of how things could come out and how you want them to come out the best possible way. That's how I think about that.
Got it. And then once you make a decision, I mean, it's moving forward, right? It's taking action. It's actually moving forward. And in my guess is some leaders have that fear of actually taking that last step and making that decision and moving forward.
My sort of history with CEOs, once they make the decisions, they tend to move forward. But the way I like to think about these things is you really have to monitor your progress against specific objectives. It's one thing to, identify a problem, come up with alternatives, make a decision, but you really need to track your progress against that and sort of get a sense of, well, how am I doing relative to how I thought I was going to do? And what are the different issues as they're coming up? So that you can, like driving a car, make some modifications so you don't go off the road. It's people who make decisions and don't even think about them afterwards until there's an issue that don't do it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a set it and forget it type thing, right? It's a continuous improvement, adapting to change, adapting to risk, adapting to the intelligence that's driven into your organization.
Absolutely.
It's
right.
just it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? So it's just continually improving what you got.
Absolutely. Totally right.
Awesome. Jason, Paul, any additional questions for David while we have him?
I'm good for right now.
Good to go.
David, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Great to be here. Great to be with you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, David.
You're welcome.
Great to meet you.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, bye-bye.
We'll take a quick break and then welcome Brian Reed from Now Secure for our next interview.